Good afternoon, everyone. How do I sound at the back there? Am I okay? It's cool, awesome. Thanks all for hanging out here for this afternoon's talk. I know the call to General Assembly grows strong this hour, so I do appreciate you all hanging out with us. To kick things off, I'm going to play a short clip. If anyone happens to be sensitive to flashing lights or colours, please look away now.
What's up, news? My name is Dave and I'll be revealing some top secret shit with you today. The Illuminati have once again returned and you must stop them. Get ready to 360 blaze it and 420 no-scope them for the good of mankind. That's right, scrubs, we're coming back. 420 blaze it 2 game of the year, dank dreams and goated memes. Hashtag wow/11 like and subscribe pog.
Cool. My name is Marcus Grambau, and this is Jack Wilson. And today we'll be chatting with you about dank dreams and goated memes, turning a very intense small game into a big sequel. What we just showed you then was our recently released announcement trailer for 420 Blaze It 2, and I'm sure you have no further questions about that. But really, we'll be delving into everything 420 Blaze It shortly, but first, introductions. As I mentioned, my name is Marcus Grambau. I'm an independent game director, and I've been working in the Melbourne games industry now for about 7 years. I have previously led the development of releases such as Ink or Swim and Tombstar, and I'm now serving as game lead on 420 Blaze It 2.
Hi, and I'm Jack Wilson. I've been in games now for about 6 years. I've done lots of different things. I've done teaching, video editing. My skills were on display just then. I worked on a game called Eastshade as a quest scripter a few years ago now, and I was on Tombstar as well as a level designer / writer. And yeah, now working on 420 Blaze It 2 in level design and narrative there as well.
Cool, thank you, Jack. Today we'll be talking about our process of turning a small game into a big sequel. We'll be covering how we identified the core pillars of our game, struggled with complex design challenges, and planned the pacing of humour in our level design. Our talk could be relevant to teams who are looking to expand a demo into a full release, particularly in the comedy genre, or others who are working on a new game all entirely. We need to be super clear here that 420 Blaze It 2 is still in development, so there are things we will not be able to talk about or go into great detail. But what is 420 Blaze It, you may be asking? Once again, I'm going to play another short clip. Again, if you are sensitive to light or flashing colors or sounds, please avert your eyes.
Oh, God. I scarfed down a bag of Doritos. Whoa!
Released in late 2014, the original 420 game was a free-to-play meme parody shooter created during the golden era of memes by Andy Sum. It's a unique design where memes and text are rendered directly on top of the action, combined with intense visual and audio overstimulation, led to players falling in love with the absurdity for years to come. It was streamed by major YouTubers such as Markiplier and Jacksepticeye, and it has views well over 10 million, and the original game itself has been downloaded and played by over 1 million people. So, when Jack and I first joined the team to help create 420, we looked closely at the original game to identify its major characteristics. This helped to make sure that we were capturing the essence of the original in the sequel. Many can be seen here on this screenshot. We have memes, of course. The dankest of the dank, goated memes only. Press F to Jason there being my favorite. The real ones no. Surreal and satirical. This is pretty straightforward. Obviously, you would have seen from the videos. Not much of an explanation needed there. nor is there an explanation really as to why you have Snoop Dogg dancing, or Sonic, or the rainbow frog flying around. Sometimes your points read as points, sometimes they read as Microsoft points, sometimes they read as skill or lols. It changes at random. You have 240 health and 555 bullets, because yes. It doesn't make sense and doesn't need to make sense. For us, it's better if it doesn't make sense. It contained a simple, funny premise. You're on a secret mission. You must sneak into the base and eliminate the Illuminati. A straightforward narrative here acts as a counterweight to the absurdity, where action and humor are prioritized. Everything is taken over 9,000. Everything is taken to the extreme, as you could see. Lens flare that makes it hard to see enemies, overly obnoxious explosions. Everything in the game is turned to 11, even at the expense of gameplay at times. And finally, 420 friendly moments. I don't think I need to say any more about that. I don't think I'm allowed to say any more about that. All these characteristics worked for a 15 to 20 minute experience, but for us, of course, our job was to bring that into a full game. Identifying those led us to our Game of the Year design pillars. An important part of the early production process, of course, identifying our game design pillars, and this has helped us through development. Jacko, I'm sorry, I forgot to push play on the timer for the talk. The first one is underproduced instead of overproduced. So this is both a creative ideology and also a production consideration. Making an almost perceivably hasty product fits both our game's theme and also its development timeline. Outlandish and overstimulating, quite self-explanatory. It's probably the most obvious one. Over-the-top bizarre events and encounters, a barrage on the senses, and the ethos that more is more. Making sure that we stimulate both sight and sound frequently and intensely is a priority, and this philosophy is carried over even to our game's FOV settings, which can be turned all the way up to 420 degrees. It is basically unplayable at that point. Valuing silly over sensible here fits with the tone of our satire. We try to take the subversive approach to solving design problems, constantly asking ourselves, can we flip this problem on its head, and how can we do the opposite of what people expect? It fits our game. It's a satirical game. We're fortunate enough also to have the creative freedom to make a lot of these design decisions, so it's worth noting that this may not extend to all situations.
Yes, and then also, of course, we have an audience to find and an audience to plan for. There was definitely a fan base from the original game, and they're going to be returning to the sequel, and they are going to have certain expectations, things that they want to see in the game, and perhaps also expecting to be surprised as well. And we also have to consider that we will have a new audience too. And so we had to find a few sort of guiding decisions, I guess, to help us really define a lot of the bigger decisions and even the smaller decisions that we're making along the way. So the first, of course, is how easy or difficult should this game be? And the original game actually has quite a bit of challenge to it. Yes, it is a short experience, but it's quite likely that you'll die if you let yourself get overwhelmed. I mean, you're going to get overwhelmed anyway after what you just saw. But if you get overwhelmed by the enemies around you, there's a good chance that you're going to go down pretty quickly. So we want to make sure that we keep some of that in the sequel going forward. But we are also opening up to a full-length game. So we can't just hit straight off the bat with maximum challenge right from the go. We have to sort of make sure that we plan to allow new players into the genre, and of course experienced FPS players as well to come in. So we ended up settling on it should be somewhat difficult, not hugely so, but also definitely not a cakewalk. Then of course we have a lot of discussions around narrative versus gameplay. Are we wanting to put a focus on story, or are we wanting to put a focus on fun? And I think I think it's quite clear that in this game we want to tell a deep and meaningful narrative. No, I am kidding. At any chance possible, we are prioritizing fun, silliness, and so that way the narrative can be quite simple, and we are all on board on that across the team. And this last bit here, which is one of my favorite clips on YouTube, which I don't have to play today, but that can be some like post-talk research for yourselves. I'm telling you, if you haven't seen it, it's very, very good. Funny versus realism. Are we going for... Well, it is, again, the FPS genre, that it does carry an expectation to be realistic in many ways. And we say, no, we're not going to do that. At every chance possible, if we can do something funny, we will go in that direction. And it's also worth mentioning, too, that we used to have a design pillar, which was it should be fun and not super challenging, that we ended up moving away from, as I mentioned before, which was that it should be challenging at points, but it's important to have the whole gambit when you're scaling up to a full production. So yes, it is okay to reassess your design pillars as you go along. I'll hand it back to Marcus, and then I will come up later to talk about level design.
Cool, thank you, Jack. Right, but now back to memes. The first characteristic that we had identified as essential for our 420 experience. So as mentioned, the first game was completely free to play, which means that Andy was able to use all of the goatedest, dankest memes his heart desired. However, we are working now to a full-length commercial product, so it wasn't, we were not in the same situation, and the use of memes quickly became very complicated. Now, as we know, almost every meme is taken from already published material, which adds to its reliability and engagement. Now, that kind of lies... therein lies the problem, the nature of memes themselves. Memes depend on copying to achieve success, whereas copyright law is designed to prevent copying at all costs. We are certainly not experts in copyright law. It is very complex, but our understanding is that the original creator of a meme does own the license to that meme. So therefore, a lot of times it's not a problem. You're sharing memes over social media for non-commercial purposes. It doesn't really become an issue. But it does when you're charging money for a product. We learned that license holders and production we learned the license holders included production companies, photographers, and artists. You could risk using other people's memes in your game, but it's a possibility that they may not notice or they may not care, but it's a risk that you'd be taking. We discovered that when we started finding precedent of license holders suing or sending cease and desist memes, cease and desist letters to games companies using their memes. The creators of Neon Cat and Keyboard Cat sued Warner Brothers for their use of their memes in Scribblenauts, and Meme Run, which is a popular game filled with memes for the Wii U, was also taken down by the individual that owned the copyright to the troll face image. Success Kid, Grumpy Cat, and Star Wars Kids are other examples of entities that have sought litigation for use of their IP. So, the decision was made we would not use any original memes in our game. No Snoop, or Futurama Fry, or Distracted Boyfriend. How could we possibly create a sequel to 420 Blaze It without memes? Well, we did try. Our initial attempt was to make memeable moments by putting players in bizarre and over-the-top scenarios that resulted in funny and random outcomes. We used stackable game modifiers, which we called frames. Each frame had up to 3 characteristics, which could either affect enemies, the environment, or players, and they could equip these at any point. They equip these at intervals throughout the game. These were references to memes or 420 culture. For example, we had a cat video frame where you would be able to double jump, swipe at enemies with your cat paw, and fight off hordes of cucumbers with guns. Pretty cool. It was fun, but one of the challenges was that they could be enabled at any point during the level and would need to be robust enough to both stand on their own and also in unison with other frames. So unfortunately, we discovered that they were not as fun as intended. It was difficult to make them enjoyable by themselves, as well as working together with other frames. It required a lot of content, otherwise it became repetitive quite quickly. Without our memes, it was less relatable for players. We found the intended references weren't landing as strongly. And we also found that we're moving a little bit too far away from the original game. And finally, as many producers in the audience may have already noticed, it was very scope-heavy, designing and developing each frame that included 3 characteristics that both worked well together and in unison with other frames, while also being able to be dynamically activated during levels, meant they became just too unviable for us. And it started to feel like we were developing another roguelike. God help us. Our last game was a roguelike, that's that joke. So, somewhat deflated, we returned to the ideation phase, once again asking ourselves, how can we go about including memes in our game? We identified 3 characteristics that we felt we could use to our advantage that were in the core of memes, essentially. The first one being that they are flexible and evolve. We didn't need to create or show completely accurate representations of these memes. In fact, the ever-evolving nature of memes means that we probably shouldn't. They are recognizable. They can be identified in many different contexts and forms. I'm sure everyone here, well, those of you who know Loss would recognize the Loss meme there. That's a good example of that. And finally, they are endlessly copied. So they're able to be recycled over and over, and they usually change during each iteration. So with all that in mind, we decided to use this information to create our own jank memes. So by identifying the elements of the meme that we are trying to replicate, it helped us to understand what was important recreating. So for us, we could see it could be the pose, for example, the Drake meme from earlier, the expression, for example, a troll face, or the context, for example, the Lost meme we just saw. By recreating those elements in our own way, we're able to ensure that players can recognize these differences while also hopefully enjoying the differences between them. You can see here an early version of our Snoop Dogg dance, and next to it a beautiful render of woman yelling at cat. You might notice the Illuminati symbols here, and that leads me to my final slide on this process, thematic connection. The Illuminati are brainwashing the world with their counterfeit memes. So the idea to make our own memes was not in isolation. We also needed to find a way to frame this in a way that felt intentional. We did not want it to feel like we had bought our memes from Wish. So the first one was, yes, framing our limitation in a way that felt intentional. That new central conceit of the Illuminati flooding the world with their own counterfeit memes. We felt like if we could feed that limitation back into the core of the game, we can make a strong design choice that would pull focus away from our lack of original memes. The hook. I feel like the brainwashing the world with counterfeit memes is quite funny. It's silly. It's easily regurgitated. And it's just dumb enough for our silly game. And finally, it gives us more opportunities for humor. When making a comedy game, you try and squeeze jokes into every possible area that you can. Jack will be discussing shortly about how that extends to level design, but it also extends to things like funny characters, dialogue, weapons, and animations. Making our own memes has given us more creative space to try to elicit laughs from players. But as I mentioned, level design and its humor components, different components, are a huge opportunity for humor. And so without further ado, we'll bring back Jack. Thank you.
Sorry. Thanks, Marcus. Okay, another design problem. So, the first game is just a little bit intense. It is perhaps too much to expect of the player if you were to just take that intensity and scale it up across a multiple hour experience. I think that it would break the brains of your player. That would be an interesting experiment. But we're not here to experiment, we are here to create a commercial product. So we have to really and carefully plan out the pacing. And for a first-person shooter, the levels are very much the canvas that the game is experienced against. And so the levels have to be planned very carefully so that the comedy in the game hits at the right moments and that the players stay engaged. So I'm going to talk through our process, what works for us. Some of this will be relevant to both level design and narrative design across different projects. One thing to mention though, what we did decide on, and this is keeping the core spirit of the first game, is that in each level, there would be at most one room, one part of the level where everything explodes into colors and memes and sounds and all the rest of that. And that kind of goes back to what I was mentioning earlier about a returning audience. They're going to expect that flavor in the sequel somewhere. So it's really important that we kept that. Remember that little green star with the 420 rooms, because that's what we call them. It'll come back into relevancy soon. So, if you're a level designer, you love sketching top-down layouts in your books, but we have to also start with our flowchart process. On a comedy game, pacing, flow is paramount. So, what I'm going to walk through now is how we go about creating a level concept. You might also just call it a narrative premise or a level premise or a level story. Many different names for it. We call it a concept. And we use this to aid in maintaining a player's engagement throughout each level and then ultimately across the game as a whole. Let's have a look at some graphs. Okay. Comedy in the game is a very nebulous concept. And this graph and the graphs following are conceptual graphs. They are not tracking any particular statistic. There's no like numbers or really like hard proof behind this. It's conceptual graphs in order to put across this idea of how players are engaging with the game with comedy. So the black dots on this chart, they're representing the comedy beats, the crafted moments of humor, where the level comes together and the teams come together and you've got all your mechanics lined up and whatever else. You've got scripted moments happening that need to happen and that will always happen. And ideally, you would have those in your level, and as the player plays through, they enjoy it more and more and more into infinity. And also, I've used the enjoyment label, not necessarily laughs, not necessarily fun. Enjoyment is like encapsulating all of those things into one. Except this is the dream, but not the reality. Here's maybe a more extreme example to give us a base to work from. Imagine that you have gone to a stand-up comedy show and the comedian only does one-liners. They come out on stage and they tell a joke, and that joke is that first black dot, and the audience enjoys it and they clap and they laugh, and then as that laughter runs off, you return to silence and the comedian then has to tell their next joke. And this continues. And if the comedian was to leave the stage, that'd be it. The show's over. Perhaps in a game that might look a little bit more like this, where you introduce a new mechanic in a level, or you put the player into a new, funny, unusual scenario, and there's a spike of enjoyment, but humans are very good at adapting to things very quickly, and so that flat line is representing this, it's like a new normal. It can be the most outlandish situation that you've put them in, but very quickly they're like, okay, I get it, I've had fun, I've kicked everything in the room that I'm allowed to kick and break. What else is new? I'm tired of kicking and breaking things. And so that enjoyment starts to peter off. So where a level concept comes in is to try and give you a baseline, which is both a sort of setting and the narrative experience and just sort of a big picture that is funny, which then everything else can play off. And I guess the best sort of other examples I can give would be perhaps the movies Hot Fuzz or Monty Python and the Holy Grail, where the big picture story is just so ridiculous, so outlandish, that then every sort of moment of humor, every beat, every joke plays on and off of the overall hilarious situation that they're in. So when you're trying to develop, when we're trying to develop a concept for each level, if we can make it wild enough, then our crafted moments of humor are elevated already. And there's always sort of a baseline of enjoyment that comes back down to when those crafted moments are done, experienced, and moved on from. But let's talk some examples. Where to start? Aliens. Sure, cool. That's a great kickoff point. But it's not enough to carry you the whole way through. For us, a game that we look at that does level concepts really well is Crash Bandicoot. So they use, of course, the hub design, and there's a world with a biome or a theme, and then in that world are a few short levels that tackle like one idea, one theme, one concept, for that world in particular. And we employ a similar approach. Again, we're not released, so I can't go into too much detail, but we do have this idea of hub, world, and then levels. And by breaking it up like this, we can get more distance in our humor. So if we have a really funny idea that works well for a whole world, then the levels can explore different aspects of why that idea is funny. So the concept for a level should have two parts: your narrative and then your gameplay. And some of this will feel familiar to many people in the room, I'm sure. But things to pull from for your narrative side of things should be your themes of your game, your setting, your character. So what is your character going through at this point in the story? What about your character's background or their arc, for example? You could pull ideas from that. And also I've listed here audience and culture. This works well for us. For example, we have a level about different conspiracies. And that stems from the culture of MLG memes, which is a statement in itself, where the Illuminati plays a big part in those videos. And the Illuminati is itself a conspiracy. You heard it here first. But so this idea of conspiracies leads nicely to, well, why don't we just have a whole level about conspiracy in our game, or a whole world, for example. So that's one way to tackle it. Then from the gameplay side, you should be considering your mechanics as this level designer's bread and butter, using mechanics in different and an interesting way and encouraging players to find ways to combine things. But you might know your mechanics very, very intimately. I hope you do. And so you might have an idea of like, oh, we could do a level where it's specifically this twist on a certain mechanic. And that's good enough to sort of start your concept. Of course, you can consider your genre. In the first-person genre, there's a lot of tropes there that we can play on. But on the flip side, we had quite a few levels in a row that were run and gun. So we thought, let's mix it up. Again, we are making a full-length sequel here, so it's important to keep things fresh. And we have one level where you are now driving in a car, and it's an on-the-rails shooter, and you've got to get to work. Of course, considering your 3 Cs, character, control, and camera, you want to make sure that you're doing something within the boundaries of your game's capabilities. And very importantly, what is the player experience that you're trying to create? Are you asking too much of your player? You might come up with a really cool concept, but if it's expecting your player to make too many mental hurdles to understand what there is that they're trying to do, they're unlikely to enjoy it. So think about what the player's experience is in the suggested concept. All right, let's have a look at an example from our game, one that I can talk about today. Oh, sorry, one last thing. Of course, you can either play it subtle or extreme. Your humor can be subtle or extreme. 420 Blazer 2, very obviously we go the extreme at every point that we possibly can. So, we have a level in the game, and its concept on the narrative side. The world is all about capitalism. We picked that as a subject, and letting each level as part of that world explore that. So we thought, okay, what's an extreme form of capitalism? What if you were the world's richest person? Cool. That's a good enough sort of hook to start with. But what's an extreme situation or scenario, whatnot, for that? What if you lost all of your money over something ridiculous? I can't think of any examples off the top of my head. What? And then, of course, okay, so we went, cool, that's a nice narrative side of things. How about the gameplay? What does that look like? What have we got that we can work with? Well, how about a collectathon? This is something that's quite common in games. It's a bit of fun to mix that into a first-person shooter, and it works well in the concept of trying to get a lot of money. You may as well be collecting money if that's also part of the narrative. And of course, the trope of gating the player's progress until they have X number of points or gems or whatever you want to call it. So we thought, well, what if you have to earn enough money as you're going along to unlock the next area to eventually become the world's richest person to try and do a thing? And that works well for us because we can actually make sure that if we do have these gated moments, that the player has become the world's richest person by the time they finish the level. They can't just accidentally kind of bypass that. So overall, for this particular level, the player must earn money to become the world's richest person in order to buy Anaphon, that's a tech company in our game, which immediately crashes and they lose all of their money. And as I said before, there's gated progress along the way. Cool, this works nicely for a concept. Then, of course, we have to define the beats. So, what are some ways that the player could earn money? Or a lot of money? Well, not that one. So, draw a strike through that. That won't be in the level. How about this one? Shoplifting. No one said there was, ethics in our game. It's a bit tongue-in-cheek, so sure, shoplifting, why not? You could run a hot dog stand. It might be very successful. Or some silly ways of earning money. What if you invested in the stock market? Yeah, there's an asterisk there. Down the bottom it said the slide is intended as humor and not to be taken as financial advice. Or you could just rob a rich person's house. And we thought, okay, these are all kind of fun, quirky ideas. We can work all of these into a single level. So, because, again, we are unreleased, I have had to cover up some information with sad cat memes. I do apologize. So here's actually a little screenshot from one of our working documents. I love to use Miro. I think it's great, very easy to throw some stuff together. If you haven't used Miro before, worth checking out. I'm not sponsored by them, so yeah. So yes, the blue post-it notes are our beats, and you can see here that we start in, oh yeah, I can use the pointer, yeah. Start in the PC room, you're at home, you can't afford to buy Anaphon, but you want to, so then you got to go out into the world, you do the hot dog stand, you do more stuff, then you go to a rich person's house, blah, 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 all the rest of it. Then we make sure we don't leave this out. This is our 420 moment from earlier, where the game goes crazy, wild, and everything's flashing colors and all the rest of it. And this is actually very important to flowchart your level like this. Before you start drawing your top-down layouts, before you're getting into your 3D environment tools and software, having a very simple top-down view like this allows you to quickly mix and match and get a sense of the pacing overall. And for a comedy game, this is paramount. This is so important because then you can see where your smaller jokes are at the start and when your bigger jokes are at the end, or your small moments and your bigger moments. So, we can now map this back onto our chart from before, where our green dotted line along the bottom there is representing the concept. It's funny enough to sort of keep engagement there, enjoyment there across the level. And then the blue post-it notes are our individually crafted beats. And while this is good, it does still present a problem. And that problem is, this is still a lot of work for us as a development team. This is a lot of work to craft humor every single moment across the game. There should be more opportunities for the players to make their own fun. So we have Consumables. Power-ups. They are power-ups. Temporary power-ups. Now, these allow the player to create their own fun, and now these are discovered as pickups in the level, and of course, they do as would be expected of a power-up to do, and enhance your abilities, make the mechanics a bit beefed up a bit more. We really put an angle on making sure that when the player has these consumables, they are creating cool moments. For example, now when you power slide across the ground, everything goes slow motion. If you kick someone across the room, it's all slow-mo, all the rest of it. Or they provide a power fantasy in making you stronger, faster, or quite literally bigger, and you have to crouch to go through doorways. And this is important too, because if you remember earlier, I mentioned we made a discrete decision that the game should be challenging at times. Because when the player finds these power-ups, that challenge and the overcoming of that challenge is a lot of fun, very, very enjoyable. So we make sure that these temporary power-ups are placed. Now, the blue line kind of represents how they come in. The temporary power-ups are most likely to be found in between the crafted moments of humor in the game, in between our big beats. And they last for a short period of time, which we also build the levels out to, I build the levels out so that it wanes off before the next important moment comes along. Sometimes the moments are improved by having a power-up that's active at that point. Sometimes it is just not. Certain things need to be on screen at certain times, the player needs to be looking a certain direction, all sorts of stuff needs to happen for those crafted moments. But allowing the player to find the power-ups in the in-between moments allows them to create their own fun, and it fills that gap, and it stops that fall-off from happening so much. So then they can continue to enjoy each level along the way, and then that is a really key part of how we make sure that the pacing for the comedy is coherent, going from a small game across to a full-length experience. I will now invite Marcus up to do our conclusion. Marcus, thank you.
Cool, thank you, Jack. So yes, to conclude the talk here today, this is our experience as we're currently going through, the experience we're currently going through is we try to turn a small game into a long-form sequel. In summary, our takeaways are identifying, a summary for anyone who might be in a similar situation to us. My takeaways for this talk would be to please identify the core essence of your original work, find creativity by leaning into your limitations, and design the pacing of your comedy by planning your beats in advance. Thank you all again for coming. I appreciate it, so does Jack, and I hope you all have a great day. We may have time for a few questions, I think. Yeah, thanks.
So just got a mic.
I can shout. The idea of the Illuminati. The idea of the Illuminati coming out with the counterfeit memes really tied this whole new game concept together. It's a great idea.
Thanks.
I just wondered, how did you actually arrive at that? Was it a brainstorming session of many ideas that you kind of voted on, or did you just have some single super creative person who just said, this is it?
I think it was... Do you mind if I handle this one?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah. I think a lot of bashing your head against the wall, to be honest. Like, we definitely had discussions where we were trying to figure out how we could make it fit thematically without any luck. And particularly because we had some narrative already in the game, and also game systems that we had to account for. So it was trying to dodge all the different potential blockers, I suppose. In answer to the question of like when did it actually came from, I think I was in the shower. And I think I was just like, that would be really cool if it was intentional and the Illuminati were putting their own counterfeit memes out. But that was sort of the culmination of a whole bunch of difficult discussions before that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Cool.
I'm just wondering, like, how challenging was it to pin down your audience and what their sense of humor is? Just because you're making a sequel to a game that came out in 2014. Memes were very different back then, and there's lots of different subsets of meme culture now. Like, how did you sort of go about identifying your audience and their sense of humor?
Yeah. Should
I can take this one.
you?
Yeah. We are very much leaning into the nostalgia of the first game as well. So we are recreating a lot of that, sort of the feel of that time and the memes and humor from that period. We have actually had quite a few discussions about should we lean into Gen Z humor or not, and it didn't quite feel right for the game overall. So there's definitely elements that do sneak in because, as I said before, like, we are looking for a new audience as well. But at the heart of it, it is a sequel to 420 Blaze It, which was so stylistically strong that we decided to sort of gravitate more towards that instead of leaning too far away into new territory. Yeah.
Cool. All right, thank you. Awesome. Appreciate it.